Perhaps the two most chilling words you can hear strung together in a doctor's office. It's cancer. The upside is that technology and research are not only increasing the number of survivors, but they're responsible for surgical techniques way beyond the days when it all resembled a medieval torture device. Some strains are high profile: breast cancer, prostate cancer, lung cancer, even brain cancer. Colon cancer remains for the most part the great unspoken. March is National Colon Cancer Awareness Month. Joining us now is Walt Hughes, a survivor, whose road to recovery was at times a tightrope. Walt is the owner of United Seacoast, which services the seafood industry nationwide. He beat the disease through medical skills of oncologists at Monmouth Medical Center in Long Branch. Walt, thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Helping shed some light on this insidious disease.
Sure.
Let's start with what drove you to the doctor's office? What was it that told you that you needed to get some sort of medical opinion on what was going on with you? What was going on with you?
Well, it was actually about 6 weeks of what I considered to be irritable bowel syndrome or gas pains, or it was last March, as coincidence would have it, that I first started to notice the pains in the morning, and I was associating it with stress, because sometimes that's how it's reflected in people. You know, you have discomfort of the lower tract, so I kind of blew it off for a few weeks, but then finally the pain, my wife said, "You got to go see the doctor," and I went and saw my local doctor in town in Atlantic Highlands, Dr. Mova, and he recommended immediately that I go have a colonoscopy, which I arranged to have done in a few weeks, and they immediately came back with, "No, you've got colorectal cancer for sure. You know, we've got to actually move very quickly on this." So I was able to get associated with Dr. Arvanitis, and he was the lead surgeon on the procedure. And I went into Monmouth Medical Center on, I believe it was May 25th is when we finally had it. He had his entire team there. He does the colorectal part of it, and he had a bladder guy there because there was some intrusion into the top of my bladder, and he had an entire team standing by during the procedure. It took about 5 hours. It was only supposed to take about 3, but basically what they did was resection my bowel, put it back together, and ever since then everything's been working fine in that department. Unfortunately, as is usually the case with colorectal cancer, it had metastasized and moved to my liver. So I've been on chemotherapy since last July. I've had about 17 treatments, and so far the liver metastases have shrunk by about 65% to 70%. So I'm responding well to the chemotherapy, and I don't feel any great discomfort from the chemotherapy, but you know, it's heavy duty drugs, and it does slow you down a little bit for sure.
Well, you said that you lived with it for a few weeks, maybe as many as 6 weeks. What did they tell you about those 6 weeks? Did they say if you'd have come in when you first knew about it, this would have been a whole different story?
That was a tough deal. For it to be a whole different story, supposedly the size of it was about the size of a grapefruit. So it had grown. It didn't grow that big in 6 weeks. It had been kicking around in there probably for a while. No doctor could really put their finger on it, but if I were to guess, I would say I was probably coping with it for at least 6 or 8 months and never knew it. No symptoms whatsoever.
No symptoms, no physical manifestations, no appearance changes, nothing along those lines?
Nothing along those lines.
Fatigue, none of that?
None of that. It was just, it reached a point, I guess, where it started to, become aggressive, and unfortunately, like I say, it did move to the liver, which is a very common secondary position for it to move to. And luckily, like I said, I've been responding well to the chemotherapy. And I've still got several more sessions left before we'll decide what the next step would be, whether it would be future surgery to remove what's left. But right now, we're still concentrating on just shrinking the several masses that have gone to the liver. I'm sorry. It's an insidious disease. It saps. You can lose 10 or 15 pounds in no time after the surgery, just because your body is consuming itself, because it's hard to eat right after surgery. So I lost about 20 pounds, and I've gained back 12 of them. So I'm only 8 pounds off of where I was before it started. But
let's talk a little bit about the surgical technique, because laparoscopic surgery is what I understand was used for you.
Yes.
And that's becoming more common now. It's very common in hernia surgeries.
Yes.
Was that the only option given you, or were you given several options? And how did you elect to say, okay, that's the one I'll go with?
Well, I went with what Dr. Arvanitis suggested. He said we'll do the laparoscopic surgery because it's less invasive, and that's what they went in to do, and they were successful in eliminating the tumor that way.
So basically, it was robotic.
Well, I was kind of asleep at the time, but
What was
I had somebody very good running the robot, that's for sure.
Talk a little bit about the recovery time and the recovery experience.
I was in the hospital for about a week, got out, and then it was just at home recovery for several months till you get built up a little bit before your body is ready to take on the chemo, which is a big, the difference. Radiation wasn't an option in my case. They wanted to elect to make sure that they were getting anything that might have been down there, so they went with the chemo. And it's, like I said, proven through CAT scans to be working very effectively.
What sort of alterations to your diet, your lifestyle, your overall maintenance, self-maintenance, have you had to adopt?
You have to. I'm an avid label reader now. You have to watch your sugar intake, because as it turns out, cancer and its tumors love sweets. They're ravenous for sweets, so you have to keep a lid on your sweets. And of course, you try to put the accent on good quality, high protein foods to build up the muscle mass that you did lose during your recovery period. Now, when they do, there's a fine line. You have to have a good amount of calories to build yourself back up, but you don't want to have them all to be sugar calories, because you're actually feeding the tumor just what it wants. So I have, over the last almost year now, learned the concoctions to make a nice milkshake with protein mix and straight whole milk, and just try to eat as much as you can whenever you want and whatever you want. It's like, if I don't feel like what's on the table for supper, I'll make something else. It's your stomach is not in a real eating kind of mood, and that's a byproduct of the chemo.
Are there any other methods you've had to adopt in day-to-day maintenance of your condition?
Well, it takes longer to get up and get moving. I take minor medication in the morning, nothing of any great consequence, but it just takes a little bit longer because you sleep during the night and you wake up and you don't feel totally refreshed all the time, because your mind is always going.
Right.
So during the day, I'm working about 80% at the business right now, and I've got folks running it in my absence. But I'm getting, the last 2 or 3 months, I've been getting more and more active. So I feel good. I think I've crossed the hurdle as far as whether you're going to kind of win this battle or lose this battle. So I feel like I'm definitely winning at this
You're
point.
80% of work. You're doing good.
Right.
Now, and that's another aspect. You're a dynamo. You run a business. You run a big business. And yet, when you have that talk with the doctor, no one can know what goes through someone's head unless they're getting that talk. What happened to you?
Well, it was just as I've done my reading and done my research, some of it's anecdotal, but most of it is true that stress, you have to eliminate stress if you're going to heal. That's why for 6 months I had to walk away from the business pretty much. I was 10%. If you have a real big problem, give me a call. But if not, just do the best you can.
Mm-hmm.
Because stress is that on, which is why it kind of masked the symptoms when I first had them. I said, well, stress in my past life, when I'm stressed out, like during the winter when the weather's bad, that tends to restrict my production at the facilities. And you get that, it feels like gas pains. It feels like severe gas pains. And I said, well, it's stress. You get it every winter. And it turned out not to be. But the minute I stepped away from the business for several months, I could feel the stress starting to drain away, because you have to be 100% focused on getting better.
Right.
And you have to be focused on eating, not stressing out, be glad you're here. The business will go on without you, believe it or not. Sometimes you don't want to believe that, but in fact it does fine without me. And
now let's look at that a second. You came face to face with your own mortality, and you learned how to cope with that.
mm-hmm.
Now that you're a survivor, what runs through your mind? How do you look at life now that you didn't before?
Every day is a gift.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure when you wake up in the morning, you may not have a lot planned on your calendar or whatever, but enjoy every day, because you just never know when your number is going to be up. And
Well, there are a lot of people who get up, they're a little achy, maybe they're not even a little achy, as you weren't. What would you tell somebody? Like, people just don't think about early detection for almost any cancer, much less colon cancer. What would you recommend to people who are putting it off, or they don't even think about it?
I've been a proponent. I've had like 3 or 4 of my closer friends actually do it. When my doctor's been after me for years, I'm 66 years old now. He's been after me since I was 60 to have a colonoscopy. Oh, no, you hear the horror stories about, it's uncomfortable. If I had done it when he had told me to do it back in 5 or 6 years ago, I'm sure we wouldn't be having this discussion. He probably would have found some benign polyps that could have been serviced at that point in time, and I wouldn't be faced with this. So having done the colostomy, all I can tell anybody is it's a lifesaver. It's no big deal. You're asleep when it happens. When you wake up, you don't even know what's been going on. The discomfort is minor. It's gotten a bad rep with a lot of people, like it's a horrible procedure. It absolutely is not, and it's the only really gold standard for getting a handle on whether you maybe have a few polyps, which tends to lay the groundwork for future cancer. So no later than age 60, make sure you get a colonoscopy. It's well worth it than going through what I had to go through.
And with regard to Monmouth Medical Center and the staff,
Mm-hmm.
the surgeons, the oncologists, the aides, what was your experience there? I have to figure that they have incredibly good follow-through.
They had excellent. I had excellent care, excellent service. Anytime I needed anything, my questions were always answered. My doctor visited regularly when I was in there. I was only in there for a week because they like to get you up and moving as soon as they can. As soon as they're sure that the surgery's been successful, they want to get you back on the road to recovery. So that's where we went, but I could speak nothing but of high praise for all the folks down at Monmouth Medical Center. And
let's get a plug in for United Seacoast. Tell us about the business.
it's a clam purifying operation based in Seabright, New Jersey. That's where we harvest clams from Sandy Hook Bay and put them through a purification system for 48 hours to remove any bacteria and or sand that may be in them. And then they're released for sale, and I distribute them to restaurants, wholesalers, and other clam dealers around the country.
Seafood's high in protein, right?
It's very high in protein.
So you're skimming any off the top?
No, I'm not. Actually, I've got to. One of my doctors says, "Hey, now be careful. No raw shellfish because your immune system's a little compromised from the chemo." He says, "You cook all you want." So it's one of those things. You probably eat clams more than I do during the year. I love them, but it's just when you see them all day. At the end of the day, it's about the last thing you want to put in your bag and bring home. But I enjoy it, and it's we've been doing it now for almost 25 years.
That's incredible. Congratulations! You're a business success story in New Jersey, as well as a colon cancer success story.
Yes, well, like I say,
in a very rarefied atmosphere.
I did a lot of research and a lot of background searching, and I was made well aware that Dr. Arvanitis was the man for this job, and he certainly did a difficult situation because when he got in there was more going on than what he thought. You know, it just couldn't show up until you actually go in there and visualize what's going on. But that's why we waited. We had to kick the operation down the road for about 3 weeks until he could get his entire team, as he calls it, together, because as he said, he did need his urologist, his bladder surgeon had to do a little repair on the bladder. So if he had gone in by himself earlier, you know, he probably is. We're all glad we waited those 3 weeks. You know, it was getting touch and go there. Like, you know, I was starting to feel more and more discomfort, and but it looks like he did a very good job, and I've been doing the best I can to follow up on my end as far as nutrition and activity and try to put things right. If you sit back and just let it roll you over, it will. You have to be willing to fight. And there's been a lot of people that say there's some folks that when they get that diagnosis, they just raise the white flag and surrender. And I said, no, it's too. Unfortunately, it's still too early for me to surrender. So I just had to sit there and slug it out.
Nobody really gets up and says, I can't wait to go get a colonoscopy.
Right.
Walt Hughes is living proof. He's a fighter. He's a survivor. He's still running a huge business. He's there because he took the steps. Best argument in the world for early detection and for going for that colonoscopy, even if you don't think there's anything wrong. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's a real pleasure to make your
Pleasure
acquaintance.
talking to you folks. And don't forget, get that colonoscopy. It pays.
Amen.